right, hey everyone, Dr. Louie and Dr. Namani back with TheAthleteSpine. And if you guys have been following our videos, this is actually the first video we've done with just the two of us in a long time. And so I thought we'd dive into sort of a fun topic, really, and that's, what are the most common sports that, or really any athletic activity that causes spine injuries? Yeah, and we were thinking about this the other day, right? We present a lot of cases of football injuries and other contact sport injuries, but is that just what happens to hit the news and what's really out there? But what we wanted to discuss today was a study that was done out of Harvard last year that actually looked at all these patients that presented with spine injuries and what activities they were performing from an athletic standpoint that led to these activities or to these injuries.
Yeah, and as Dr. Lou was saying, a lot of these injuries that make the news obviously happen to professional athletes, right? But it's important to remember that these sorts of injuries can happen to all of us, even those without any athletic talent like myself, can get injured and have a...
We're all athletes in our own heart.
Yeah. Exactly, at least on the weekends we are. And so this study was a paper out of Harvard that looked at a large database from something called the National Trauma Data Bank, which basically catalogs a lot of different traumatic injuries, around the country. And basically what they looked at was a large series of patients who had traumatic spine injuries and asked the question, basically what sporting injuries led to various types of spine fractures or spinal cord injuries.
Yeah, and so we had posted this fun Instagram story the other day, and we, showed pictures of swimmers and skiers and cyclists and football players and other sort of contact sports. And it was interesting. We found the results really interesting, and they were very different from what everyone thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we actually just posed this question to one of our partners. What do you think was the number one sporting activity that caused a spinal injury? And it was actually cycling. So cycling came in at around 81% of all sports-related spinal injuries that occurred. And that was followed up at about 12% by skiing and snowboarding injuries. Contact sports, believe it or not, only represented around 3% of all spinal injuries. I think the interesting thing is that if you look closer at the data in terms of the severity of the injuries that occurred, because you can have a spine injury, which can be a minor fracture like a compression fracture, but it doesn't necessarily cause an injury to the spinal cord, which are the more devastating injuries that can cause, numbness, weakness, paraplegia, or quadriplegia. And if you look specifically at the severity of the injuries, it turns out that contact sports and water sports, presumably things like diving and swimming, resulted in a much higher rate of spinal cord injury, whereas things like cycling typically resulted in lesser fractures or lesser injuries that didn't have a higher amount of spinal cord injuries.
Yeah, and what's important to notice in this data set specifically is that they did not include motorized vehicle sports, right? So your NASCAR drivers, ATV accidents, any motorized vehicle was not included. But the reason we were like, well, why are the cyclists getting into so many spine injuries? And then a deeper dive really showed that a lot of those injuries that resulted in spine injuries had some sort of motor vehicle collision component to it. So it's not just that your everyday cyclers going over the handlebars on these potholes. I mean, that may be part of it, but there are certainly cars that it involved. And so this is always a fun discussion, right? Because, it's fun to talk about professional athletes, but we have to remember that a lot of us participate in athletic endeavors still, and, there's still a high risk of spine injuries. And so if they looked at this whole database, this is all traumatic injuries that present, nationwide. 15% of all injuries were actually spine related. Mm-hmm. So even though, the spine segment we talk about all the time sounds rare because we don't know as many people sort of outside of our work that have had spinal cord or spine injuries, I mean, it's still 15% of all traumas. And so something we should definitely be aware of.
And also, a lot of these injuries were not limited to the spine, so there were a lot of other associated injuries that went along with. So things like head injuries, extremity injuries, and things like that. And so, for those 81% of people that are in cycling accidents that are having spine fractures, they also had traumatic brain injuries and other terrible things. And so I think that the knowledge or the things that people tell you about how to be safe, wear a helmet when you ride a bike, pay attention attention to road signs and traffic lights. Don't dive into shallow water. All this stuff, is still good advice to try to keep yourself from being the recipient of one of these terrible injuries.
Yeah, don't use us as an excuse to be lazy and not bike into work because you don't want to get a spine injury now, or don't want to swim, or don't want to be active. Certainly safe ways to do that. But just thought it'd be a fun topic to talk about today just because it was surprising to us when we saw it. So thanks for tuning in. We've got some great upcoming videos as well. As always, remember to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram at TheAthleteSpine.
All right, see you, everyone.